Hello and welcome to this video. Today we're going to discuss why are they asking LeetCode and what's that proxy for, and whether it's a good evaluation of your skills, whether it's a bad evaluation skill, and how to understand actually how to prepare better and how to understand it once and for all in 2025, 2026 as well, the same thing. So basically today we're going to walk you through real quick as LeetCode as a proxy. What I mean is, how do they use LeetCode to understand your actually practical understanding and skills. And here there is a very important paradigm which we're going to discuss. In order to understand that, I'm going to give you a short story. Imagine two people are trying to prove to you who is the better fisherman. You bring them both to the river, you ask them to think out loud what they're going to do, etc. And the first guy brings out his fishing rod, and the other guy starts thinking and speaking out loud, saying, okay, do I need a shotgun? Do I need a slingshot? Do I need a fishing rod? It's in the river, so I'm probably gonna need a fishing rod. So yeah, okay, I'm gonna use a fishing rod as well. And here you immediately know that the first guy is the good one and the second guy has no idea what he's doing, right? But the interesting point here is that both of these guys came up to the right solution. Both of these guys came up to that they have to use a fishing rod, correct? And very often what happens is a lot of the guys who go to interviews and they say, okay, I managed to pass that solution, I managed to pass that problem, but I didn't pass through the stage. Why is that? And here I'm going to give you a couple of examples, a couple of practical examples that we had recently. One of them was about the CDN. We had a guy interviewing at a fairly big company, a couple $1 billion company. He was asked about a system design that involved CDN. That's just another example to make so you can understand better. He was asked to use a CDN, and what happened was he started thinking about it, giving some pluses and minuses. Eventually, the feedback was that this guy never used CDN in his life, but the guy came up with the right answers. How did they know? Well, the way they did know is that first, the structure, the problem that they had was about a stock market like platform. They had like a lot of data, a lot of changing data, a lot of new data, and the guy was considering CDN at all in order to like cache and stuff, and doesn't reusing stuff. But everyone who has ever used a CDN knows that CDN is only good where you have like static data, so that don't really change. Otherwise the cache is going up and you need to refetch the origin all the time. So the fact that this guy started considering and going through stuff means that he never implemented that. He literally never did that in his life, because if you did that once, you would know at least whether it's in general a good thing or a bad thing. That's something that happens a lot. Like, you go to an interview, you think you've passed it, you've come up to the right solution, but the way you come up to the solution is actually what's important. And that's what differentiates whether you're a really good engineer or you're not. And that's why most companies basically decide to put you to a proxy instead of asking you to go through the entire thing. Why? I mean, obviously asking a couple of LeetCode questions takes like 40 minutes. And if you don't know them, I mean, there is some chance that you might be a really good person, but most likely you're not going to be a good one. So if you don't get them right, the right way, it's even more important. And some cases, maybe you have example of where you didn't really pass the algorithm, but you knew what it was about, so you managed to actually make it. That's very popular. There is a TopK algorithm, maybe you've heard that. And we had an example of a guy applying for a role, and they basically asked him, okay, we have all these many products, and we need to constantly keep the ones that are the most training. We need the most training ones. How do you do that? It took the guy like literally a second to say, okay, that's a TopK problem. I've done that before. I've seen that, etc. Which, I mean, he didn't really manage to implement the entire algorithm with the heap, etc. He needed a little bit of help about that to come up to the solution, but he knew about the entire concept. So basically, your interviewer is using LeetCode as a proxy, not to estimate how good you are as a competitive programmer, but rather how well do you know all the concepts, whether you have a practical experience, because if you've ever gone fishing, you know you just need a fishing rod. You're never going to consider using a gun. That's one of the main reasons. It's also very good to see whether the person, especially for more junior people, if you've really done a little bit more coding or you're just a hot shot, just like blatantly applying and you've never done a lot of coding. How they do that? I mean, they just give you a matrix and a little bit of operations. And if you can't really make a couple of small operations like string manipulations, array splitting, whatever, you don't really write a lot of code. For someone who did like, I don't know, who wrote code for 2 years every day, a lot of time, he would be really good like using his language, knowing the syntax, and be able to do all these small operations. So the goal of the problems are not to test how good of an algorithmic guy you are, but rather to check how much of a context you know, how much of experience you have. and it's really good proxy. And it does allow for very, very quick filtering. There is also another example we prepared about the Google's auto-completion. That's another story of a guy who went to an interview, and this guy was said to have some background into auto-completion system. But basically what happened, he went there and the interviewer gave him a try problem. And this guy took like 40 minutes. He didn't even came up with a try terminology even once, whatever. And eventually the interviewer, this guy managed to like solve the problem suboptimally, etc. But eventually the interviewer asks him, okay, do you know what a try is? And this guy said like, yeah, I've heard about it, but not really in depth. And he was like immediately cut from the interview, obviously. Because how do you do an auto-completion system if you haven't heard of try, which is the absolutely by far most popular algorithm that Google uses for their auto-completion systems? There are like so many case study system designs, etc. So that means that this guy has been maybe working with something, but he most obviously lied about it. That was actually an interview at Google itself. And it's really easy to find whether somebody is lying if you use a proxy. That's actually how we call cheaters on interviews. What we use, that's actually a very nice system. You can use that in your interviews. We give them something with a complicated terminology, and they just go through and read that, and they start implementing the solution. And what we do, once they complete the solution, which is obviously AI generated, I just ask them, okay, explain this terminology from the problem, and they just can't. And very often what I do is you can always give them something with like tuples or triples, triplets, etc. And they can't even explain the problem itself. We've had cases where people just say, okay, I have no idea about that. I just lied. Because it's so obvious, because that proxy is so good, that they're just disarmed. They don't have anything else to say. So for your next interview, keep in mind that LeetCode is a proxy. The idea is not to get the solution right, but the way you're going to get it very often. And there are a lot of cases where you can't really get a solution, but it's still fine, because obviously you knew what you're doing, you knew your theory, you knew the background, you actually had that experience, what you say you have, and with a little bit of hints here and there, you actually managed to pass that. So don't really focus on the problem itself solely, but try to understand the concepts behind it. And given that when you start practicing LeetCode or whatever, don't just blatantly focus on the algorithm and trying to learn the algorithm itself. Each algorithm solves a real life problem somewhere, somewhat. Try to understand that. This way you're literally going to be a lot better at preparing, but if you have like the right mindset, the right framework on what are they going to look for, this way you're going to be able to prep better as well. But yeah, for more, you can always check out topcoding.io or drop us a message. So we look forward to hearing to you, and best of luck with your next interview.